Music.
Yep, now it's good. Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I'm your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim and Tracy. We are all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts? A pervasive belief in a divine skydive? An insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you are now listening to the cure for these ailments, Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after each episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors. But we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We'll now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. Now, I suppose with all the chaos that has been caused by coronavirus, people only think of viruses as being disease-causing agents. However, viruses play many useful roles, especially ecologically and in the evolution of life on the planet. One of the more astounding things that was discovered when the human genome was fully sequenced was that our genomes are comprised of about 50% retrovirus sequences. Now, a new virus, the largest ever discovered, appears to be involved in the evolution of life as well. Tim has the story, so Tim, tell us what you've got.
Thanks, Dr. Brad. I have an article from The Scientist, the March 2020 issue, and it's titled, "Researchers Discovered the Largest Virus in Oceans Yet." A few years ago, Dr. Alexandria Worden, who is a professor at GEOMR, and also a professor at the Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Kiel, Germany, if I'm pronouncing that German city right. She set sail with a medical grade fluorescence active single cell sorter And her goal was to collect unicellular eukaryotes and isolate them individually for a single cell whole genome sequence. The trip in part was a survey that also included expeditions on the Pacific Ocean to find archaea, bacteria, and other organisms associated with these microbes. During the voyage, the majority of the cells selected turned out to be choanoflagellates, and they're predatory eukaryotes that feed on bacteria. The team used sequencing to look for bacteria and archaea among the choanoflagellates. But to quote Dr. Worden, quote, when we're getting a big signal, we weren't getting a big signal, excuse me. After the expedition, postdoc Dr. David Needham decided to search the frozen samples for the presence of viruses. And lo and behold, he found a virus, and not just any old virus. What he found was the largest known ocean virus and only the second virus discovered to infect predatory ocean protists. By looking, quote, by looking for the usual microbial candidates, we initially missed that there was a quite beautiful virus to be assembled, said Dr. Worden. The new virus has been classified into the family Mimiviridae and in the phylum Nucleosidoviricata. And the Mimiviridae is a family of giant viruses, the majority of which infect non-marine protists such as amoeba. So you think finding the largest ocean virus would be prestigious enough, but come to find out that was just the beginning of their discoveries. The newly discovered virus was named the choanovirus. Its genome consisted of 775,000 kilobase pairs of double-stranded DNA, which is an impressive size. It is estimated that the virus genome codes for 872 proteins, which 442 appear to be unique, which having no known homologies. 3 of the proteins the virus codes for were particularly exciting to Dr. Worden's team. They identified 3 proteins of rhodopsin, the light processing receptor found in certain cellular membranes of many living organisms, including humans. The viral genome also codes for components of a pathway that synthesizes the pigment molecule beta carotene, along with the enzyme that processes it into retinol. The pigment that does the actual, retinol is the pigment that does the actual light sensing with the rhodopsin protein. Humans and most karyotes make only part of the rhodopsin machinery and have to obtain beta carotene from external sources to make up the retinol. To find out what these viral rhodopsins were possibly doing inside the choanoflagellate host, I'm really struggling this morning for some reason. Dr. Worden's team expressed the viral sequences in E. coli and found that light triggered the proteins to start pumping protons. So it is believed that the virus is actually helping the choanoflagellate harvest energy from the sun. In other words, using sunlight to make ATP. Quote, something you would never expect in a predatory cell, said Dr. Worden. She goes on to say, here was a virus bringing an entirely new function, something that didn't exist, into the host organism. Now organisms using rhodopsin to generate chemical energy from light is not a new discovery. Decades ago, scientists reported that haedophilic archaea used rhodopsins to generate energy. Also in the 2000, Dr. Worden's co-author, Dr. Ed DeLong, and colleagues described marine bacteria that also use rhodopsins to capture light energy. Last year, according to Dr. Laura Gomez Consarnario of the University of Southern California, she and her colleagues quantified the abundance of rhodopsin in seawater samples and estimated that in some parts of the ocean, the energy harvested from sunlight by rhodopsin is more than that captured by chlorophyll.
Wow.
Yeah, yes. This virus discovery is the first to possibly show a mutualistic relationship between a virus and a predatory unicellular organism, giving that organism the ability to use light to generate chemical energy. The article quoted Dr. Joaquin, yes, I think it is pronounced that, Martinez from the Bigelow Laboratory of Ocean Sciences. Quote, so far, we mostly have circumstantial evidence of a symbiotic relationship between marine viruses and host. He goes on to say part of the trouble is that many of these organisms are not cultured, making lab experiments on them impossible, at least for now. And until more subjects have been cultivated in the lab, papers like this are very important to keep building on the circumstantial evidence with more actual data. Okay, so that's a really interesting possible relationship between the virus and the choanoflagellate other than a parasite-host relationship.
Yeah, I mean, you know, viruses never cease to amaze me. It's it's incredible some of the things that they do. You know, again, we typically just think of them as you know, pathogens, as organisms we have to deal with to save ourselves from disease.
Right.
But it's clear that they've been involved in our evolutionary history, not just in human evolutionary history, but in evolutionary history of life in general on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, were you at our evolution symposium in 2009?
I believe I was.
Okay, yeah. Do you remember J. Craig Venter, his lab representative, Shannon Williamson, talked about the Decoding the Oceans project?
Oh, yeah, I think I vaguely do.
Tracy, are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
I'm not familiar.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what's and your story reminded me of this, but I'm just gonna use my finger here. But if you were to draw a graph showing that on the y-axis that the number of new novel genes being described, and then on the x-axis number of kilobases of DNA being sequenced.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when you look at a typical genome project that's done, say, on a standard animal or plant, one that we're in essence familiar with, the number of new genes is basically nil. Okay, there's very little.
Right.
But with this Decoding the Oceans project, I got to figure out which way to point here. it's been a straight up line. I'll just do this way. The number of new genes per amount of DNA is still going up.
Right.
Okay, so we're nowhere near discovering the number of novel genes that are out there in the ocean. And it's just that was probably one of the things that really struck me when I listened to that talk of hers was that fact, and we're still going. I imagine it's still exponential.
I just thought it was amazing, again, with the number of proteins that protein coding regions that virus has, period, and then again the number of novel protein coding regions.
Right. So for our listeners, let's try to put this into perspective a little bit. So how large is the E. coli genome? It's what, about 4 million bases, right? 4 million base pairs?
Somewhere in there, yeah.
Yeah, and so you said that we've got 770 kilobases of DNA here in this virus?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's about...
872, excuse me, 872.
800,
or
okay.
875. 875.
Right, So that's about the fourth of the size of the E. coli genome right there.
Right.
Okay, which is incredible. Now your smallest viruses will have, say, on the order of about 5,000 bases of genetic information.
Yeah.
Okay, so that also puts it in perspective. And then the smallest, I think the smallest free living cell only has something like 300 genes. And so this would be larger than in terms of genomic coding capacity than your smallest free living cells. So once again, we have this continuum of life. You know, we don't just get to say, well, this amount of genomic material yields this and this yields that. We have a great deal of overlap.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So what did they speculate any further as to the origin of the rhodopsins?
They did. I don't think they did on that article. I don't recall them. And I didn't go to the, I didn't look for the published article.
Okay.
I guess I did read a little bit of the published article, but I guess I didn't get into the discussion or see that.
Yeah, because creationists love to point that out, that there's nothing more perfect than the human eye, and it's not possible for the human eye to have evolved. And here we have the key genes for vision in a virus.
Yeah, and actually, it's better because it has the ability to produce the beta carotene, which is needed for the rhodopsin activation.
Yeah. So I almost ended up working on that in graduate school. If I had gone to Iowa State rather than Baylor, I probably would have been working on beta carotene and vitamin A. Let's see, I got to get this straight. It's been a while since I've thought about that, but I think beta carotene is what gets split into vitamin A.
Yeah, I know there's a connection.
Yeah, because beta carotene is in essence a vitamin A dimer. So it really is true out there. Really is true that eating carrots is good for your vision.
That's right. Eat your carrots. Yes.
Plus, of course, vitamin A deficiency in general is a problem in a number of third world countries. They'll have, that's something that they'll evaluate if there's, for example, vitamin deficiency induced blindness.
Okay.
They can administer vitamin A and literally cure that. Literally take care of it. So. Well, gosh, Tim, I mean, that fascinating story. Thanks so much for presenting that.
You bet.
So obviously, again, because of the coronavirus situation, vaccination is on everybody's mind. But a new method of vaccination has been developed that may replace the needle and syringe approach. So Tim, you've also got this story, so fill us in.
Okay, so again, another article from The Scientist. This is from the March 2020 issue. Whoops, sorry. It is from The Scientist, but it isn't the March, it's the June 2020 issue. Vaccines without vials, fridges, or needles was the title of the article. So the development of vaccines are and have been instrumental in drastically reducing many infectious and lethal diseases worldwide. Unfortunately, this protection isn't available in low-income countries with poor or limited healthcare systems. The article mentioned that there are two issues affecting the accessibility of vaccines in low-income countries. One is the need for constant refrigeration from production to injection. And then the second is, again, having trained personnel to administer the injections. So in an effort to solve the temperature issue, some vaccines are lyophilized, which are basically freeze-dried, so they can be transported to in a powder form. But Dr. Mariah Corley, a pharmacologist at the University of Texas at Austin, says, in some instances, the stability of lyophilized vaccines is less than ideal. Some can be damaged if they freeze during transport or storage. And of course, the lyophilized vaccines still need to be reconstituted before they're injected by professionals. So in an effort to address this issue, or these issues, current vaccine transport, storage, and delivery, Dr. Corley and her research team have developed a vaccine preparation method that would solve these issues. It provides temperature stability and easy administration of the vaccine. The virus to be used in the vaccine is first added to a thick mixture of methylcellulose, which is made from cellulose, which maybe you recall, or some of you don't recall, but cellulose is the major component of plant cell walls. Methylcellulose is also, by the way, methylcellulose is a common additive in laxatives. They also mix it, methylcellulose, they mix it with sugar alcohol, which is not sugars bound to alcohol. It's a natural man-made sweetener. Common example would be sorbitol. And then they also mix it in with, also put in the mixture a surfactant, which reduces surface tension of the liquid. Okay, so now they get this mixture. They next, under sterile conditions, the mixture is poured into thin layers and air dried. So, quote, it's like how you make taffy, Dr. Corley says. Also, according to Dr. Corley, the key to the virus's survival are the molecules of surfactant, which form a bubble around each virus particle, suspending and protecting it. Once a dry, thin, peelable film has been produced containing the virus to be used for vaccination, the film can then be stored at room temperature for up to 3 years and can maintain viability through repeated cycles of freezing and thawing. Now, vaccination would be simpler too. The person would be given a small square of the film vaccine. They would place it in their mouth and allow it to dissolve into their cheek or under their tongue. In testing the film vaccine, Dr. Corley's team prepared N1H1 influenza virus as a film, and were able to show that when administered to the oral mucosa of mice, it induced antibody titers comparable to those obtained with standard intramuscular injection. Dr. Russell Midra, pharmaceutical chemist at the University of Kansas, who was not involved in the research, was quoted as saying, transportation of vaccines, particularly in the developing world, has always been a major issue, and this would seem to overcome most of the known problems. Kaishore Wasan of the University of Saskatchewan and the University of British Columbia, also who did not participate in the research, was quoted in the article, quote, it's a very important paper and extremely timely in the light of the mad rush to come up with and distribute a vaccine for COVID-19. This is huge, he says. So Dr. Corley now plans to automate the film preparation process to enable production at a necessary scale for vaccine distribution. And so again, I thought a very interesting development or discovery, I guess more of a development by her team.
Yeah, so I take it that this would be for an attenuated viral vaccine?
Right, yeah, it would be for attenuated. I think in some of the studies with the mice, they used maybe live form, but it didn't say specifically. I know the little there's a little cartoon that was with it and talked about using an attenuated vaccine, not a live. But,
well, remember, attenuated is alive.
well, live, but weakened.
Right, but attenuate literally means to weaken. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
So the virus has been weakened.
Right.
But just briefly again for our listeners, so this would not work for viruses that are fully inactivated, or what we would call a killed virus vaccine, or potentially a subunit vaccine.
Right.
Because your body would simply treat that as food. Okay, so it would, if it doesn't replicate, okay, if the virus does not replicate, then it's simply treated as food, because viruses are simply proteins and nucleic acid, just like taking a big bite out of a hamburger.
Right. Right.
So that's what you take in, is protein and a little bit of lipid and a little bit of nucleic acid. So it simply be treated as food if it isn't live and replicates.
And I was assuming, and maybe we can discuss that, or you can talk about that, that you're letting it dissolve in the mouth, and then you're hoping that it then binds to mucosal cells within the mouth, or do you think it's also going to bind in mucosal cells within the digestive system? Because if you're letting it dissolve, you're hoping that it.
Sure, it would depend on the virus.
Right. Right.
For example, the definition of a coronavirus is stability at pH 3. So that's why poliovirus, for example, and other enteroviruses can survive the intestinal tract and then potentially cause infection, is because they're stable at low pH.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends. It would depend on the virus that you want to use,
and
where it would need to be infectious.
And you could envision it should work if they're able to develop for the coronavirus, that would be a perfect delivery method, would it not? As far as
you would think so. At least reasonably so.
Yeah.
Obviously you'd have to work out what the dose would be.
Right.
To cause infection via that route. But yeah, I could see how you could potentially do it that way for coronavirus.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that research and how successful.
Yeah, really well.
So is this something that's still, I guess, in the testing process?
Yes. Definitely still in the testing phase with. Again, they didn't see anything where they'd progressed other than in their mouse testing on mice.
Okay.
Just to point this out, but most of us have had a vaccine like this.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If you've had the oral polio vaccine, for example, do you remember standing in line for your sugar cube?
Yep. I remember going down to the Kearney National Guard Armory and standing in line to get the little sugar cube and taking that sugar cube.
So they just put a drop of the live attenuated virus on the sugar cube. You ingest it, and voila, you're immunized. So this is not new in terms of the concept, but it's new in terms of the precise means of delivery. So.
Right, and just the fact that you'll be able to transport that anywhere in the world, and it's a dry form basically, and you wouldn't necessarily need a health physician to inject. I mean, it doesn't have to be injected. Just to have somebody dispense the little sheet of film.
Yeah, that's of course huge, and not having to maintain the cold chain in tropical regions is huge as well, obviously.
Yeah. Yes. So.
All right, Tim. Thanks so much for those two stories, and we'll be right back with more Sounds Reasonable after a short break.
monsters, everything that brought me alive. But we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my hands without an alibi. Smoking gun, you got me on the wrong weed. All that will come, we're out up till dawn. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a lover's fight without an alibi. Took my insides. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters, everything that brought me alive. Oh, we're all like monsters, playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on June 14th, 2020. Now, the one wall that I wish Trump was building up rather than trying to tear down is the wall of separation between church and state. This has an interesting history, how it was developed in the first place, and we'll take a look also at where things stand now. Tracy has developed this story, so Tracy, it's all yours.
Thanks, Dr. Brad. The pandemic has sparked a need for the government to step in and create a $2 trillion economic relief package. And that includes about $350 billion for the Small Business Administration to extend loans to businesses in need. And this, for the first time ever, has included help for churches to pay pastor salaries and utility bills. And like I said, this is the first time ever that the government has outwardly given money specifically to churches. And just to give you a little history here, let's see. Originally, Baptists supported separation of church and state. And I'm just kind of I can get my document here. Back at the beginning of the 1800s, the Danbury Baptist Association of Danbury, Connecticut wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson, and in Connecticut, their state constitution didn't provide any distinction between religion and separation of church and state. So they asked Thomas Jefferson to provide some guidance. And he wrote a letter, and this is where, let's see. This is where some words came into play that isn't in the actual Constitution, but a lot of people think it is. His response dated January 1st, 1802, and he said, "Gentlemen, the affectionate sentiment of esteem and approbation which you are so good as to express toward me on behalf of the Danbury Baptist Association give me the highest satisfaction. My duties dictate a faithful and zealous pursuit of the interests of my constituents, and in proportion as they are persuaded for my fidelity to those duties, the discharge of them becomes more and more pleasing. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between a man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature would, quote, make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced that he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. So NPR ran a story just after this economic legislation was passed in May and quoted the SBA statement that says faith-based organizations are eligible to receive SBA loans regardless of whether they provide secular social services. No otherwise eligible organization will be disqualified from receiving a loan because of their religious nature, religious identity, or religious speech of the organization. The NPR article goes on to say churches have been especially hard hit by shutdown orders because many of them rely on weekly offerings that are no longer being collected. Now, just this week, almost a week ago, there was an opinion column written by 3 attorneys and published in the New York Times, and it was entitled "The Quiet Demise of the Separation of Church and State," written by Nelson Tebb, Micah Schwartzman, and Richard Schrager. Well, they're law professors, my bad. The First Amendment's Establishment Clause prohibits the government from making any law, quote, respecting an establishment of religion, and that's, of course, the First Amendment. This has long been thought to prohibit direct government support for religion. And this is an opinions column again, and I just happen to agree. The contours of that idea has been contested, and they have contracted over time. So over time, whereas back in the beginning of the 1800s or the end of the 1700s, you know, it was a wall at first, and now I view it as kind of a line that's become either blurred or at least a thin line, and it keeps getting thinner. But the commitment to some form of separation of church and state had endured, yet in response to the coronavirus pandemic, Congress had approved that huge payout with tax dollars. Thousands of churches applied for help under the Paycheck Protection Program.
Imagine that.
Yeah, an important moment in the nation's constitutional history, the quiet demise of the already ailing separation of church and state. Now, I don't know about everyone else in the free thought community, but when I walk into my child's principal's office, I don't like to see crosses. I don't like going to the holiday choir concert and it being called a Christmas concert. I'm pretty steadfast in that as far as that goes.
Well, how about walking into your county courthouse and having "In God We Trust" right above the public bulletin board?
Exactly.
That's the case in my county right now. Tim,
Right.
have you got anything along those lines?
Well, as a journalist, I've covered countless city council meetings, water board meetings, quorum court meetings.
Waterboarding meetings?
Waterboarding meetings, exactly.
Oh my God.
It feels kind of like that. But,
Depending on who it is, I may go.
most recently, I was a reporter in a very, very, very Christian community. I think there were more churches than houses. But at every single government meeting, except for the airport commission, weirdly, but they would have an invocation at the beginning of the meeting, and it didn't matter if it was before the meeting started, if it was number one thing on the agenda, they always had an invocation, and I sat during the invocation at every single meeting. So, I just didn't think it was appropriate. That wasn't the place for a Christian invocation.
Well, look at our money. Our money, everything, God we trust. Praying
Yeah.
on money. And what wasn't there, Brad? Was there a courthouse was it in Nebraska City or somewhere like that had the 10 Commandments up on the lawn?
Potentially. I mean, we
It was somewhere in Nebraska, but a while ago. But
we've got it in our community park out in Harmon Park.
yeah.
And I actually contacted American Atheists about that. And they said, well, it's very difficult to sue over something like that.
Right.
But they said, obviously, it is taking tax dollars whether or not it was donated because there's upkeep, et cetera. So it's not it wouldn't matter if it was donated or not. It's
Right.
on public land and it requires tax dollars to be maintained.
Right.
So yeah, but I've honestly never heard a person of religion point this out, and I'm hoping that somehow somebody from that perspective will listen to this, listen to our broadcast today.
Right.
But I've never heard any of them point out that the original intent, or at least one of the original intents of the Establishment Clause, was to prevent the domination of one religion over another.
Right.
And that was what the Danbury Baptists were worried about.
That's right. The Danbury Baptists, they were kind of a smaller sect, and they didn't want to be dominated by other more prominent religions. They just want to be treated as equal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where they came from there.
Yeah, because a number of the European immigrants, when they came here, they were leaving their country of origin for that very reason, to evade religious persecution, even though they were themselves presumably all Christian at that point in time. And so, it's incredible how all of this has gotten so twisted. I equate it to playing tennis without the net now. That's where we're at with separation of church and state. I mean, how do you know who scores? There's no net. Yeah.
Right.
So anyway, that it's a mess.
And then Citizens United made, again, another part of that, I think, was the fact that now any business or any church or anything then can be considered an individual in donating as much money they want to any campaigns. And so, it's just all accumulation of things that have been going on, and to where now, like you said, Brad, that we're to the point where there are people, if you're not a Christian or if you're any other religion or not a religious, then that's strongly looked down upon. So.
Yeah, absolutely, and of course that leads to all the other problems that we get in education in particular, but certainly other aspects of society as well.
Right.
All right. Well, Tracy, thanks so much for relaying that story, and we'll be right back with some more Sounds Reasonable after this break.
Sure thing.
You had your heart set on me, but these feels, they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget, but you're breaking down my walls again, just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Staying up when I go out, you gotta know I'm all yours. But when I say what's that about, you start slurring your words. Tell me why you have to seem so distant when I'm holding you. Your fingertips are drifting away.
And we're back with another politics story, and I'll be presenting this one. So what is Antifa? We've been hearing about it a lot these past few days as Trump searches for a scapegoat for the protests. He has gone so far as to declare Antifa a terrorist organization, although he doesn't possess the power to make such a designation. And he accused the 75-year-old man that was shoved to the ground by police in Buffalo, New York, as potentially being a member of Antifa. So apparently it must be important. So just what is it? And I'm going to relay part of a story written by Lee Sotile in the High County News on June 5th of this year. So as cities across the United States entered a 6th day of protest sparked by the death of George Floyd, a black man killed while in the custody of Minneapolis police officers on May 25th, President Donald Trump did something no other president had done before. He attempted to make a terrorist designation by a tweet. The United States of America will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization, he wrote, referring to an anti-fascist movement that has gained momentum during his administration. So that's literally what Antifa stands for, is anti-fascist. Now, the next afternoon, speaking from the White House Rose Garden, Trump reiterated the promise, or that promise, as flashbang grenades echoed nearby. Peaceful protesters demonstrating against nationwide police brutality against people of color were sent screaming and sprinting away. In recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, or arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others, Trump told reporters. Experts called Trump's designation an empty threat that would be challenged in court. But it wasn't a new idea. Last year, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, Republican, co-sponsored a bill to brand anti-fascists as terrorists. In Washington, Republican State Representative Matt Shea, who has himself participated in far-right domestic terrorism, according to a bipartisan investigation last year, introduced a bill to investigate Antifa. Neither gained traction. Now, anti-fascist, okay, so what would that have meant, say, in the 1940s?
Getting hauled off to a concentration camp.
No. If you were an anti-fascist in the 1940s, you were the typical American, because Italy was a fascist regime. And of course, Nazism, in my view anyway, is just another form of fascism. So you would have been in the vast majority of what the thoughts were back in the 1940s. Okay, almost everyone was anti-fascist.
I was thinking if I was in Germany. Sorry, Brad.
Oh, yeah, right. Now, I should have said depending on where you were. Exactly. Yeah, if you were anti-fascist in Italy or Germany, you were in trouble in the 1940s. That's right. Now, 2 years ago, tired of seeing anti-fascists portrayed as only masked, black-clad protesters breaking windows or getting into fistfights, and, quote, everyday anti-fascist group formed in Portland, Oregon. They called themselves Popular Mobilization, or Pop Mob. And this was a response to the rallies continually being held in the city by far-right agitators like the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer. Now, if you recall, the Proud Boys were one of the major organizers of the Charlottesville campaign, shall we say, or the march, or whatever you want to call it, torch rally. As Pop Mob spokesperson Effie Baum told High Country News, the group's goal was to send a clear message: fascists aren't welcome here. Pop Mob also wanted to reframe the media's image of Antifa. The group coined the term everyday anti-fascist and turned counter-protests into dance parties, circuses, and most famously, free milkshake giveaways. The High County News recently caught up with Baum to talk about Trump's threat and the fact that not all anti-fascists wear black. Some, in fact, wear banana costumes. And this is a great thing to do when you have a group like the Proud Boys, for example. Now just think of what they're attempting to accomplish by going into a particular region. They're looking for propaganda film. You know, they want to be filmed in fist fights, you know, looking tough, you know, looking all Trumpian, shall we say, and you know, defeating the black the black veiled Antifa people, and you know, so dressing up in banana costumes, you know, giving away milkshakes, you know, I mean that just had to deflate the hell out. You know, I mean, they go there looking for a fist fight, and how are they going to look punching a banana? You know.
Damn bananas.
So I thought that was absolutely awesome and brilliant on their part.
Kill them with kindness. Huh?
Exactly, kill them with kindness.
Yeah.
And a number of free thought groups actually took this on too. When there have been anti-gay, for example, protests,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of them would show up and make a wager of some kind with the other side as to who could raise the most money for a charity in 1 hour. And of course, what are they going to say? They're supposed to be these Christian groups, right? How are they against raising money for charity? So they have to try. And inevitably, the free thought groups would outraise them every time. Just absolutely crushing their standing by taking a passive stance. So sometimes they'd make a bet like, who could raise the most money by taking a water balloon in the face? So I mean that's the way to go after groups like this, and so when it comes to Antifa, Antifa simply means anti-fascist, and quite frankly, that should be something that we are all supporting, not being against. Right. And you have to approach it in this way and not show up in black garb and looking evil, shall we say? But you have to show up in a festive mood, ready to debunk fascism.
Interesting.
Need to get those big purple dinosaur costumes,
right? And they mentioned that too. Actually, some of them dressed up like unicorns. Yeah, so they weren't just in banana costumes; they were in unicorns, all kinds of different costumes. But everything that you would think about in terms of being festive, right. They were dressed up in.
Sounds like Sunday kickball.
Yeah, exactly. So I give this group a lot of credit. I mean, they really did a great job of diffusing what the Proud Boys and some of those other right-wing groups had in mind for the day.
Great.
Very good.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll be back with our crazy story of the week after a short break.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? And don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? And you were fool's gold. Yes, I did. And I did it all for love. Yes, I did it all for love. Oh, they say fools believe in.
All right. So just when you thought it was clear that the things your mother kept under the sink were not for consumption, along comes Dr. Trump to tell us otherwise. Tim has our crazy story of the week. So, Tim, what has Mr. Wonderful been telling the nation to do now?
Well, I think this would be our insane story of the week. Classify it that crazy. And this story comes from the Daily News on June 5th, titled, "Americans are gargling with bleach and drinking household cleaners to prevent coronavirus." And this is a CDC report. So it's a new report, a new CDC report indicates that Americans are putting household disinfectants, including bleach, into their bodies as a preventative measure because they believe such practices can ward off the coronavirus. CDC interviewed 502 participants to ascertain what they knew about disinfectants and asked how those subjects were using those products to combat the SARS-CoV-2 virus. According to the CDC, 4% of those surveyed, which would be 20 people, admitted that they drank or gargled household agents, including bleach. Staggering 18% of the participants confessed they'd applied cleaning agents to their skin, and nearly 10% inhaled fumes from potentially toxic household disinfectants.
Wow.
Yeah, yes. The mean age of the survey respondents was 46, with subjects ranging in age from 18 to 86 years old. Those surveyed came from across the country and skewed slightly female. The CDC said of the respondents, 63% were identified themselves as non-Hispanic white, 16% were Hispanic, 12% were Hispanic, non-Hispanic blacks, and 8% were multiracial or other races or ethnicity. Concerns about the ingestion of household cleaning products spiked in April when President Trump, Dr. Trump, speculated during a press briefing that disinfectants, quote, by injecting inside or almost a cleaning, unquote, could someday be used to clean the lungs of people infected with COVID-19. In the report, the CDC stated, these practices pose a risk of severe tissue damage and corrosive injury and should be strictly avoided. In the report, they also stated, although adverse health effects reported by respondents could not be attributed to their engaging in high-risk practices, the association between these high-risk practices and reported adverse health effects indicates a need for public messaging again and again regarding safe and effective cleaning and disinfecting practices aimed at preventing the SARS-CoV-2 transmission in households. You know, Dr. Brad and Tracy, I just hate it when scientific data surfaces to reinforce the stereotypes that whites are crazy MFers. And that's our crazy story.
But did it work? Did it work? No?
No, it doesn't. It's not.
I'm shocked.
And it's and right after Dr. Trump gave that message in his press briefing, the disinfectant companies came out and said, do not do that with our products. And the CDC and the health care officials were coming out again and saying, do not do that. But who do people listen to?
I don't suppose there is any breakdown with the 63% white as to political affiliation.
No, they didn't. That would have been interesting to see. Hey,
wait a minute! I just came up with an idea. We could show up in Jacksonville right before the Republican rally and sell bottles of Clorox.
Yeah. Well,
Clorox chewables.
Yes. And after he had that press conference where he discussed that, I read a story where or somebody had said that he had received information from a person that was promoting that, was adding taking water and adding several drops of Clorox bleach and then gargling or rinsing with that. And so they were speculating that that some of what, why he was talking about things, because he was getting information saying that people were doing this or people were promoting this. And
well, yeah, I mean, it'd be one of his typical statements like, Well, I'm hearing that this is working.
Yeah. Right. Very sound.
That's what people are saying out there. That's what I'm going by.
Yeah, exactly. But it's, you know, and it reminded me of, you know, when I was back in graduate school working under you, Dr. Erickson, at nights my dad had a private cleaning company where they did the beef processing plant in Gibbon and the turkey plant. So I was supervising a cleanup crew in the turkey plant. Anyway, the manager of the plant had got a cut or something on his foot. And so he knew that, you know, Clorox was a disinfectant. So what did he do? He poured bleach onto the open wound. And of course,
Yeah.
made it worse. Yeah. So, and this was the manager of the turkey plant. So
Oh my God.
anyway, it's just insane what people
Yeah.
do. So,
Yeah, boy.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Tim, thanks so much. That definitely qualifies for our crazy story of the week.
yes.
And so I think that's going to wrap us up for the week. If you have enjoyed our program, please pass word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page, Sounds Reasonable. We look forward to next week when we'll present another episode of Sounds Reasonable. Remember, there is a big difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Tracy and Tim saying so long.